My grandfather's old farm was always a place of comfort, but returning after all these years, I found something deeply unsettling. There were rules, strange, unspoken rules that made no sense yet felt incredibly important. What secrets was this seemingly idyllic place hiding? And why did breaking even the smallest rule fill me with dread? I am Eric, 23 years old, and I had not seen my grandfather's farm in Blackwater since I was 12. That is 11 years of my life spent away from the place where I had some of my best childhood memories. The farm sat on the edge of Blackwater, a small town in rural Pennsylvania that most maps forgot to include. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the general store closed at 6 p.m. sharp, and where strangers were noticed immediately. My grandfather, Samuel, had passed away 3 weeks before I made the journey back. The funeral was small, attended by maybe 15 people, most of them old-timers from Blackwater who remembered when the farm was in its prime. My father, Samuel's son, had died when I was young, and my mother had remarried and moved to California. I was the only direct family member left, which meant the farm was now mine. The lawyer's office in Blackwater was a cramped room above the hardware store. Mr. Peterson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, handed me a thick envelope along with the deed to the property. "Your grandfather left specific instructions," Mr. Peterson said, his voice careful and measured. "He wanted you to read this letter before you set foot on the farm." I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and my grandfather's handwriting sprawled across the front. "For Eric. Read before arriving." I waited until I was in my rental car before opening it. My hand shook slightly as I unfolded the letter. My grandfather's handwriting was shaky, probably written in his final days. "Dear Eric," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone and the farm is yours. I know you have not been back since you were a boy, and there are reasons for that which your mother understood. But now you are a man, and you deserve to know the truth about our family's land. The farm is not like other places. It has been in our family for 5 generations, and in that time, we have learned that certain things must be respected. There are rules, Eric, 4 rules that must never be broken. I know they will sound strange to you. I know you will want to question them, but I am begging you as your grandfather who loves you, follow them exactly. Your life may depend on it." My stomach tightened as I read. The letter continued with the 4 rules, each one written in careful, deliberate script. Rule 1. Never go into the barn between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. No matter what sounds you hear, no matter what you think you see, stay in the house during those hours. Rule 2. If you find the rocking chair on the porch moving by itself, do not stop it. Let it rock until it stops on its own. Rule 3. Never look directly at the scarecrow in the north field after sunset. You may glance at it, but never hold your gaze. Rule 4. If you hear your name called 3 times in a row from the woods behind the property, do not answer and do not go to investigate. Come inside immediately and lock all the doors. The letter ended with a simple plea. "Please, Eric, I know this sounds like the rambling of an old man, but trust me. Follow the rules. The farm will take care of you if you respect it. Your loving grandfather, Samuel." I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the letter. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as the confused writings of a dying man, but another part of me, the part that remembered strange things from my childhood visits, felt a cold finger of fear trace down my spine. I remembered being 12, the last summer I spent at the farm. I remembered my mother's face when she came to pick me up, how she had argued with my grandfather in hushed, urgent tones. I remembered her saying, "Never again, Dad. I would not put him through this." And I remembered the drive home, how she had gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white, and how she had made me promise never to ask about the farm again. But I was 23 now, not 12. I needed to see the place, to understand what my grandfather meant. And frankly, I needed the property. My job at the tech startup had fallen through. My apartment lease was ending and I had nowhere else to go. The farm was paid off, and according to Mr. Peterson, there was even a small trust fund my grandfather had left for maintenance and property taxes. I drove down the long gravel road that led to the farm just as the sun was beginning to set. The property was exactly as I remembered it. A 2-story white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a large red barn about 100 yards from the house, and fields that stretched out in every direction. The north field where the scarecrow stood was overgrown now, the corn having gone wild without my grandfather to tend it. As I parked the car, I noticed the rocking chair on the porch. It was still, but I found myself watching it, remembering Rule 2. A cool breeze blew across the property, carrying with it the smell of earth and something else, something faintly sweet and rotting. I grabbed my bags from the trunk and walked up to the porch. The key Mr. Peterson had given me fit perfectly in the lock, and the door swung open with a familiar creak. Inside, everything was frozen in time. My grandfather's boots still sat by the door. His coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter, a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, though I could not imagine who had wound it. I spent the first hour just walking through the house, reacquainting myself with the space. Upstairs, I found my old room, still made up with the same baseball-themed bedspread I had used as a kid. My grandfather had kept it exactly as I had left it. As darkness fell, I became acutely aware of the silence. In the city, there was always noise, traffic, sirens, voices. Here there was nothing but the wind and the occasional creak of the old house settling. I made myself a simple dinner from the canned goods I found in the pantry and tried not to think about the rules. By 10 p.m., I was exhausted from the drive and the emotional weight of the day. I locked all the doors, just as my grandfather's letter had suggested, and headed upstairs to bed. I set an alarm on my phone for 1:45 a.m. I told myself I just wanted to see if anything actually happened during those forbidden hours, but really I was terrified of accidentally breaking Rule 1. Sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of my grandfather, young and strong like in the old photographs, working the fields. In the dream, he turned to me and opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, crows began flying out of his mouth, dozens of them, their caws filling the air. I woke with a start to my phone alarm. 1:45 a.m. The house was completely dark except for the glow of my phone. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. 15 minutes until 2 a.m. 15 minutes until the forbidden time began. I crept to the window and looked out toward the barn. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. The barn looked innocent enough, just an old structure that needed a new coat of paint. But as I watched, I thought I saw something move near the barn door. A shadow, perhaps, or a trick of the light. Am arrived with the distant chime of the grandfather clock downstairs. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I was starting to feel foolish for even checking when I heard it. A sound coming from the barn. It was faint at first, like the shuffling of feet on hay. Then it grew louder. It sounded like something was moving around in there, something big. The rational part of my brain said it was probably raccoons or possums. The farm had been empty for weeks. Animals had likely moved in. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of the barn door creaking open. I pressed my face against the window, straining to see. The barn door was indeed open now, swinging slowly in the breeze, and standing in the doorway was a figure. It was too dark to make out details, but it was definitely the shape of a person, tall and thin, standing perfectly still. As I watched, the figure began to move. It walked out of the barn with a strange, jerky gait, like a puppet being controlled by an amateur. It moved across the yard, heading toward the house. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run downstairs, to lock the door, to hide. But I could not move. I was frozen watching this thing approach. The figure stopped about halfway to the house. It stood there for a moment and then slowly, impossibly, its head tilted back. Even from the second-floor window, even in the darkness, I could feel it looking at me. Not at my window, but at me specifically, at my eyes through the glass. I stumbled backward, away from the window, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed my phone, 2:17 a.m., still well within the forbidden hours. I sat on the bed, pulling my knees to my chest, and waited. Every sound the house made seemed amplified. The creak of floorboards, the rattle of pipes, the endless ticking of that clock. At 3:30 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps that moved from one end to the other, back and forth for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. I pulled the blanket over my head like a child, hating myself for being so afraid but unable to shake the terror that gripped me. Finally, mercifully, 4 a.m. came. The footsteps stopped immediately, as if someone had flipped a switch. I waited another 15 minutes before I dared to move, then crept back to the window. The barn door was closed. The yard was empty. Everything looked exactly as it had before 2 a.m., peaceful and still in the moonlight. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in bed, lights on, and waited for sunrise. When the first rays of dawn crept through the window, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I went downstairs, made coffee with shaking hands, and sat at the kitchen table. My grandfather's letter spread out before me. I had witnessed something I could not explain. Something that violated every rule of reality I understood, and I had 3 more rules to worry about. The next few days passed in a strange routine. I spent the daylight hours exploring the property, cleaning up the house, and trying to convince myself that what I had seen that first night was just my imagination. I told myself I had been exhausted, emotionally drained, and my mind had played tricks on me. But every night at 1:45 a.m. I set my alarm and stayed in my room, away from the windows until 4 a.m. had safely passed. And every night I heard the sounds, the barn door opening, the footsteps in the yard, sometimes voices that seemed to call out in languages I did not recognize. On the 4th day, I decided I needed help. I drove into Blackwater and found the local diner, a place called Betty's that had been there since before my grandfather was born. Inside, a handful of locals sat at the counter, nursing coffee and pie. They all turned to look at me when I walked in, and I saw recognition dawn on a few faces. "You are Samuel's grandson," an old woman said from the corner booth. She had white hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Eric, right? I remember you from when you were just a little thing." "Yes, ma'am," I said, approaching her booth. "I am sorry, I do not remember your name." "Martha," she said. "I live on the property next to your grandfather's farm. Well, 3 miles down the road anyway. That is next door by Blackwater standards." She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit down. You look like you have not slept in days." I sat, and a waitress brought me coffee without asking. Martha studied me for a long moment before speaking. "He told you about the rules," she said. It was not a question, I nodded. "You know about them?" "Everyone in Blackwater knows about that farm," Martha said quietly. "Has been strange for as long as anyone can remember. Your grandfather's father, your great-grandfather Thomas, he was the first one to write down the rules. Before that, they were just passed down through talking, parent to child. But Thomas, he wanted them official-like, wanted to make sure they did not get forgotten or changed." "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward. "What is on that land?" Martha's expression grew sad. "No one rightly knows, honey. Some say the land was cursed by the natives who lived here before settlers came. Others say your great-great-grandfather made some kind of bargain he should not have made. All I know is that land has rules, and those who follow them stay safe. Those who do not—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "What happens if you break the rules?" I asked, though part of me did not want to know. "Depends on the rule," Martha said, "but nothing good. I remember when I was a girl, maybe 17 or 18, there was a man who worked for your great-grandfather. Name was William. He did not believe in the rules, thought they were superstition. One night he went into the barn during the forbidden hours. Said he heard his daughter crying in there and he was going to get her." "What happened?" I asked. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "They found him the next morning, lying in the yard between the barn and the house. He was not dead, but he was not quite alive either. His eyes were open, but he could not see. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He lived like that for 3 more days before his heart just stopped. And the doctors, they could not find a single thing wrong with him. No injury, no illness. He just stopped. I felt sick." "And his daughter?" "She was home in bed the whole time, safe and sound. Whatever he heard crying in that barn, it was not her." We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, I asked, "Why do people stay in Blackwater? If the farm is so dangerous, if everyone knows about it, why does not someone do something?" Martha gave me a small, sad smile. "Because it is our home, Eric, and because the farm, for all its strangeness, keeps to itself mostly. It has its rules, and as long as folks respect them, it leaves people alone. Your grandfather lived there for over 70 years, and he died peaceful in his sleep. The farm took care of him because he took care to respect it." I left the diner with more questions than answers, but feeling slightly less alone. At least I was not crazy. At least other people knew about this. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and red. The rocking chair was beside me, still and silent. I found myself staring at it, wondering what would happen if it did start moving on its own. Rule 2 said to let it rock until it stopped on its own. But why? What was rocking it? And what would happen if I tried to stop it? As if summoned by my thoughts, the chair began to move. There was no wind, no reason for it, but slowly, gently, it began to rock back and forth. My heart rate spiked, and I stood up, taking a step back. The chair continued its steady rhythm, creaking slightly with each movement. I remembered the rule: do not stop it. Let it rock until it stops on its own. So I stood there watching, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The chair rocked for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. Then gradually it began to slow. Slower and slower until finally it came to rest perfectly still. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Nothing bad had happened. I had followed the rule and everything was fine. But my hands were still shaking as I went inside and locked the door behind me. That night, as I lay in bed waiting for 2 a.m., I decided I needed to call someone. I needed another person here, someone to confirm that I was not losing my mind. I thought about my mother, but I knew she would just tell me to sell the place and leave. Then I remembered Mike. Mike had been my roommate in college, my best friend. He was the kind of guy who believed in ghosts and cryptids, who watched every paranormal investigation show he could find. If anyone would believe me and actually want to help, it was Mike. I called him the next morning. "Eric, man, I have not heard from you in months. How are things?" Mike's voice was cheerful, unaware of the strangeness I was living in. "I inherited my grandfather's farm," I said, "in Pennsylvania. Place called Blackwater." "Oh man, I'm sorry about your grandfather. You doing okay?" "That is why I'm calling," I said. "The farm is weird, Mike, really weird, and I need someone to come out here and tell me I am not going insane." I could hear the excitement in his voice immediately. "Weird how?" I told him everything. The rules, the figure I had seen from the barn, the rocking chair, what Martha had told me. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "I can be there by Friday," Mike said finally. "I am taking vacation days. I am absolutely coming to see this." Relief flooded through me. "You believe me?" "Eric, you are the most skeptical person I know. If you are telling me this stuff is real, then yeah, I believe you. Plus, this sounds incredible. I mean, terrifying, but incredible." Mike arrived 3 days later, pulling up to the farm in his beat-up Honda at around 3 p.m. He got out of the car, stretched and looked around with wide eyes. "This place is amazing," he said. "I mean, creepy as hell, but amazing." I gave him the tour, showed him the house and the barn from a safe distance. I pointed out the scarecrow in the north field, a dark figure silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Mike took pictures of everything, making notes in a small notebook he had brought. "So the rules," he said as we sat on the porch later. "You have been following them exactly?" "To the letter," I said. "I have not had any problems as long as I do what the letter says." "What about Rule 4? Mike asked. "The one about hearing your name called from the woods. Has that happened?" "Not yet," I said. And as the words left my mouth, I realized I had been dreading that particular rule. The woods behind the property were dense and dark, stretching for miles. The idea of hearing my name called from in there, of fighting the urge to answer or investigate, filled me with an anxiety I could not quite name. That night, I showed Mike the routine. We set alarms for 1:45 a.m. and stayed in our rooms. I had given Mike my old room, and I was in my grandfather's room across the hall. When 2 a.m. came, we both went to our windows to watch. The barn door opened right on schedule. The figure emerged, moving with that same jerky, wrong gait. Mike's sharp intake of breath told me he saw it too. This was real. I was not crazy. We watched as the figure moved around the yard, sometimes approaching the house, sometimes wandering toward the fields. At one point, it stood directly below Mike's window, and I heard him whisper, "Oh my God," from across the hall. At 4 a.m., everything stopped. The figure walked back into the barn, the door closed, and silence returned. Mike came to my room immediately, his face pale but his eyes bright with excitement. "That was real," he said. "That was actually real. I got it on video. I mean, it is dark and grainy, but you can see it moving." We stayed up the rest of the night, drinking coffee and going through Mike's footage. On his phone screen, you could indeed see the figure, a dark shape moving against the darker night. It was not definitive proof of anything supernatural, but it was something. "We need to document everything," Mike said. Every rule, every occurrence. If this place is really haunted or cursed or whatever, we need records. Over the next few days, Mike threw himself into research. He went into Blackwater and talked to the old-timers, getting stories about the farm. He searched online for any historical records about the property. He set up cameras around the farm, trying to capture evidence. We learned that the land had originally belonged to a man named Jeremiah Cross, who had settled there in 1847. According to local legend, Jeremiah had been obsessed with immortality, with finding a way to cheat death. He had filled notebooks with strange symbols and conducted experiments that the locals whispered about. Then, one winter night, Jeremiah vanished. His wife and children were found dead in the farmhouse, and Jeremiah was never seen again. The land had passed through several families after that, and each one had reported strange occurrences. The rules had developed over time, each generation adding to them or refining them based on their experiences. My great-grandfather Thomas had been the one to consolidate them into the 4 main rules that my grandfather had passed to me. "It is like the land remembers," Mike said one afternoon as we sat on the porch. "Like whatever Jeremiah did here left a mark that never faded." On Mike's 5th night at the farm, Rule 4 finally came into play. We were sitting in the kitchen at around 8 p.m., eating dinner and discussing whether we should try to find any of Jeremiah Cross's old notebooks. That was when we heard it. "Eric." The voice came from outside, from the direction of the woods. It was faint but clear, and it sounded almost like my grandfather's voice. Mike and I froze, staring at each other. "Eric." There it was again, the second call. My heart began to pound. The rule said 3 times. If I heard my name 3 times, I had to come inside and lock the doors, but I was already inside. "Eric." The third call. This one was louder, more insistent, and this time, I recognized something that made my blood run cold. It was not just my grandfather's voice. It was layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once, all calling my name in perfect unison. "Lock the doors," I said to Mike, my voice barely a whisper. "Lock everything. Now." We moved quickly, checking every door and window in the house. I made sure the front door, the back door, and the door to the basement were all locked and bolted. Mike checked the windows, making sure they were latched. "Eric." The voice came again, but now it was closer. It sounded like it was just outside the house. "Eric." Right outside the kitchen window. I could see the curtain fluttering slightly, as if someone had pressed their face against the glass. "Eric." At the front door now. I heard the doorknob rattle, testing the lock. Mike grabbed my arm. "What do we do?" he whispered. "We stay inside," I said. "We do not answer. We do not open the door. We follow the rule." For the next hour, the voices called my name from different locations around the house. Sometimes it was my grandfather's voice. Sometimes it was my father's voice, dead for years. Once, horrifyingly, it was my mother's voice calling out, "Eric, honey, please let me in. I am so cold." But I knew my mother was safe in California. I knew none of these voices were real. They were tricks, lures, trying to get me to break the rule. Finally, around 10 p.m., the voices stopped. The night became silent again, and we were left shaking and exhausted in the locked-up house. "This is insane," Mike said, running his hands through his hair. "This is absolutely insane." I could not argue with him. We had been here less than a week, and already we had experienced things that should not be possible. But we had followed the rules, and we had survived. The next morning, Mike and I sat on the porch, tired but alive. The rocking chair was still beside us, and I noticed Mike glancing at it nervously every few minutes. "I think I need to bring more people here," Mike said. "I have friends who would want to investigate this. Proper equipment, more cameras." "No," I said immediately. "Mike, I appreciate you coming, I really do. But the more people we bring here, the more chances someone breaks a rule. And I cannot be responsible for that." Mike looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. "You are probably right. But Eric, you cannot live here like this. Constantly watching the clock, afraid of every sound. It is no way to live." "My grandfather did it for over 70 years, I pointed out. "Your grandfather was born here. He grew up with these rules. You did not. You are trying to adapt to something that should not exist. He had a point, but where else could I go? This was my inheritance, my responsibility now. And part of me, the part that was starting to understand this place, felt obligated to protect it, to make sure the rules were followed so that whatever was on this land did not spread beyond it. Mike left the next day, promising to keep in touch and to come back if I needed him. I watched his car disappear down the gravel road, and for the first time since arriving, I felt truly alone. The days turned into weeks. I fell into a routine following the rules with religious devotion. I never went near the barn between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and I learned to recognize the sounds that meant something was out there. I let the rocking chair rock whenever it started, sometimes sitting next to it and watching the empty seat move back and forth. I never looked directly at the scarecrow after sunset, though sometimes in my peripheral vision I thought I saw it move. And I learned to recognize the false calls from the woods. They came maybe once a week, always my name, always in voices I knew. I trained myself to hear that strange layered quality, that wrongness that marked them as inhuman. And I never answered. I would simply go inside, lock the doors, and wait for the voices to give up and fade away. I also started reading my grandfather's journals. I found them in the attic, boxes full of notebooks dating back decades. He had kept meticulous records of the farm, of strange occurrences, of patterns he had noticed. And scattered throughout were notes about the rules, observations about what happened when they were followed or broken. One entry, dated from when my grandfather was around my age, caught my attention. I have been thinking about why the rules work. It is not about magic or curses, I think. It is about respect. The land wants to be acknowledged. It wants to know that we understand it is not like other places. When we follow the rules, we are showing that we respect its nature, its differences, and in return it allows us to live here safely. It is a bargain, ancient and binding. But what did Jeremiah Cross do to make this bargain necessary? What did he trade, and with what? I found myself wondering the same thing. On nights when the barn was active, I would watch from my window and try to understand what I was seeing. The figure that emerged was not quite solid, not quite transparent. It was like it existed in multiple states at once, flickering between visible and invisible. One night around 3 a.m. I saw something different. There were multiple figures this time, maybe 6 or 7, all moving around the yard in a slow circle. They were holding hands, or what passed for hands, and they seemed to be dancing. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like watching something from a dream that you knew would become a nightmare if you looked at it too long. I started taking my own notes, adding to my grandfather's journals. I documented everything: the times things happened, the weather conditions, the phase of the moon. I was looking for patterns, for some kind of logic to the strangeness, and I found some. The barn was most active during the new moon. The rocking chair seemed to move more often when storms were approaching. The voices from the woods were most common on Thursdays, for reasons I could not fathom. The scarecrow. Well, I never could find a pattern for the scarecrow. It remained the most unpredictable and somehow the most frightening of all the rules. One evening, about 2 months after I had first arrived, I was walking the property line at sunset. I was careful to keep my back to the north field, to the scarecrow, as the sun dipped below the horizon. But as I walked, I felt it. A presence, a weight of attention, like being stared at by something with incredible focus. I kept walking, fighting every instinct that told me to turn around and look. My skin prickled, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling followed me all the way back to the house, that sense of being watched, being studied. When I finally made it to the porch and risked a glance back, the scarecrow was facing in my direction. I was almost certain it had been facing the other way when I had started my walk. But in the growing darkness, I could not be sure. Maybe it had always been positioned that way. Maybe I was just paranoid. I went inside and locked the door, adding another entry to my journal. As autumn deepened and the weather grew colder, I started to notice something interesting. The farm was changing me. I was not the same person who had arrived back in late summer, scared and confused. I was becoming like my grandfather, like all the people in my family who had lived here. I was learning to coexist with the strangeness, to accept it as part of the rhythm of life. I also started to feel protective of the place. When a real estate developer came by one day talking about buying the property and turning it into a subdivision, I felt a surge of anger and fear. Not fear for myself, but fear for what would happen to all those people if they built houses here. How many would break the rules? How many would suffer because they did not know, did not understand? I sent the developer away, telling him the farm was not for sale at any price. Martha visited occasionally, bringing me food and checking on me. She seemed pleased that I was still there, still following the rules. Your grandfather would be proud, she told me one afternoon. Not many young people would have stayed. Most would have sold the place and run as fast as they could. Did you ever think about why we protect it? I asked her. The farm, I mean. We follow all these rules, we live in fear of breaking them, but why? Why not just leave the place empty? Let it return to wilderness? Martha considered this. Because someone has to bear witness, she said finally. Someone has to remember. If we all leave, if we let the rules be forgotten, then one day someone will come here who does not know. And they will suffer for our forgetting. At least this way, the knowledge is preserved. The rules are followed, and the land is satisfied. That night I dreamed of Jeremiah Cross for the first time. In the dream, I was standing in the north field and he was there, gaunt and hollow-eyed, working on the scarecrow. He looked up at me and smiled, and his teeth were too many, too sharp. It was worth it, he said in the dream. Everything I paid, everything I traded, it was worth it for this. For eternity. For becoming part of the land itself. I woke up gasping, tangled in my sheets. It was 3:37 a.m., middle of the forbidden hours. I could hear something moving around outside, but I stayed in bed, stayed still, followed the rules. When morning came, I went out to the north field. I stood at a safe distance and looked at the scarecrow in the full light of day. It was old, probably been there for decades, made of rotting wood and ancient clothing, but as I looked at it, I could swear I saw something beneath the burlap sack that served as its head. The outline of a skull, maybe, or the suggestion of a face twisted in either agony or ecstasy, I could not tell which. I backed away slowly and returned to the house. Winter came, and with it, a new challenge. The cold made it harder to hear the sounds at night, harder to distinguish between the wind and something else. I had to be extra vigilant, extra careful. I invested in better locks for the doors, in heavier curtains for the windows. I prepared the house for a long winter, stocking up on food and supplies so I would not have to leave often. On Christmas Eve, I sat alone in the farmhouse, and the rocking chair began to move. But this time it was different. It rocked slowly, gently, and I had the strangest feeling that my grandfather was there, sitting in it, keeping me company. I knew it was not really him, could not be him, but the feeling was so strong that I found tears running down my face. I miss you, I said to the empty chair. I wish you had told me about all this sooner. I wish I understood. The chair continued to rock, and in that moment I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced since arriving at the farm. Whatever this place was, whatever strangeness lived here, it was not entirely malevolent. It was simply other, simply different. Existing by rules that were not human but could be understood, could be respected. The chair eventually stopped, and I went to bed feeling less alone than I had in months. January brought snow, deep and heavy, that blanketed the farm in white. The barn was a dark shape against the snow. The scarecrow in the north field looked like a dark slash across the landscape. The woods behind the property were silent, the trees bare and skeletal. I had been living on the farm for 6 months now, and I realized something. I did not want to leave. Yes, it was strange. Yes, it was sometimes terrifying. But it was also mine. It was my family's legacy, and I was beginning to understand why my grandfather had stayed here his whole life despite the rules, despite the fear. There was something honest about this place. It did not pretend to be normal. It did not hide what it was. It had its rules, and if you followed them, it would coexist with you. That was more than could be said for the regular world, where dangers hid behind smiling faces and promises meant nothing. Mike called me regularly, checking in. He wanted to come back to bring equipment and investigate further, but I kept putting him off. I was not ready to share this place again, not ready to risk someone else breaking a rule. In late January, something happened that changed everything. I was in town picking up supplies at the general store when I overheard a conversation between two men I did not recognize. They were standing by the magazine rack talking in low voices. "I am telling you, that old farm is sitting on a gold mine," one of them said. He was tall, wearing an expensive jacket that looked out of place in Blackwater. "The geological surveys show mineral deposits all through that area. If we could just get the owner to sell, we could make millions." "I heard the guy who owns it now is young," the other man said. "Maybe he will be easier to convince than the old man was." My hands tightened on my shopping basket. I quickly paid for my items and left, but the conversation stuck with me. These men wanted to buy the farm, wanted to dig into the land to disturb whatever lay beneath. The thought filled me with horror. That night I sat at my grandfather's desk and went through his papers more carefully. I found legal documents, deed restrictions, everything he had done to try to protect the land. But I also found something else. A letter he had written but never sent, addressed to my father. "Son," it read, "I know you do not understand why I stay here, why I will not leave this farm even though it has taken so much from us. Your mother understood before the land took her. She knew that someone must watch over this place, must keep the rules, must prevent others from coming here unprepared. I am asking you to understand now. When I am gone, this burden will fall to whoever inherits the farm. I have tried to make it so the land must stay in our family, so that knowledge of the rules passes down correctly. But I fear I have failed. I fear that one day someone will own this land who does not know, does not care, and then the consequences will spread beyond our property. Please, if you are reading this, please promise me you will teach Eric. Teach him the rules. Make him understand. This is not just about protecting our family anymore. It is about protecting everyone. My father had died before he could receive this letter, before my grandfather could pass on this knowledge properly. That was why everything had fallen to me unprepared. Why I had come here not knowing what I would face. I thought about the developers, about people who might come here with machines and explosives tearing into the earth. What would happen if they disturbed whatever Jeremiah Cross had awakened or created here? Would the rules still hold, or would something break free? Something that had been contained for over 150 years. I made a decision that night. I would not just follow the rules and hope for the best. I would actively protect this place. I would find a way to ensure it could never be sold, never be developed, never be disturbed. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Mr. Peterson to set up a conservation trust. I donated the land to the trust with the stipulation that I would live on it as caretaker for the rest of my life, and that after my death, it would pass to another family member who would be educated about the rules. If no family member was available, it would pass to someone from Blackwater who understood the farm's nature. The developers were not happy when they found out, but there was nothing they could do. The land was protected now, legally untouchable. Martha heard about what I had done and came to visit. She brought me a pie and tears in her eyes. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she said. "You have done what 5 generations of your family have tried to do. You have made sure the land will be protected forever." But even as I took steps to protect the farm legally, I knew that the supernatural protections were just as important. I continued to follow the rules with absolute dedication. I continued to document everything, adding to the journals that would one day be passed to whoever came after me. February brought a thaw, and with it, new activity. The barn became more active than ever, with figures appearing even during the day sometimes, though only as shadows, as fleeting impressions. The rocking chair moved almost daily. The voices from the woods called my name at least twice a week. And the scarecrow, I started to notice that it was moving. Not all at once, not in any dramatic way, but incrementally. Each day it seemed to be in a slightly different position, facing a slightly different direction. I documented this carefully, marking its position on a map of the property, trying to find a pattern. One morning in early March, I woke up and looked out my window to find the scarecrow had moved significantly. It was no longer in the north field at all. It was standing at the edge of my yard, maybe 50 feet from the house. My blood ran cold. This had never been mentioned in my grandfather's journals, never been part of the stories Martha had told me. The scarecrow was supposed to stay in the north field. That was where it had always been, where it belonged. I spent that entire day in the house watching the scarecrow through the windows. It did not move while I watched, but I had the terrible feeling that if I looked away, if I let my guard down, it would be closer when I looked back. As sunset approached, I faced a dilemma. Rule 3 said never to look directly at the scarecrow after sunset. But it was now close enough to the house that I could not avoid seeing it when I looked out any of the windows. How could I follow the rule when the scarecrow had changed the game? I decided to close all the curtains on that side of the house before sunset. I would not look at it, would not give it my direct attention, even if that meant sitting in darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard something I had never heard before, a scraping sound like wood dragging across the ground. It was moving. The scarecrow was moving, and it was getting closer. I sat in the dark, my heart pounding, and listened to that terrible scraping sound circle the house. It went around once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. I waited an hour before I dared to peek through the curtains. The scarecrow was back in the north field, exactly where it had always been, as if it had never moved at all. I added this to my journal with shaking hands. Something was changing. The rules were still in effect, but the parameters were shifting. Why? What had I done differently? Or was this simply the nature of the place evolving, adapting, testing me? The next morning I drove into town and found Martha. I told her what had happened, and her face went pale. "That has not happened since your great-grandfather's time," she said. "There was a period back in the 1920s when the farm went through something similar. Things became more active, more aggressive. Thomas thought it was because someone had been researching the property, trying to find out about Jeremiah Cross. Someone has been researching," I said, thinking of Mike's investigations, of the developers asking questions around town. "Do you think that is what triggered this?" "Maybe," Martha said. "Or maybe it is just time. Maybe every few generations the farm needs to test whoever is living there, needs to make sure they are truly committed to keeping the rules." "What happened in the 1920s?" I asked. "How did Thomas handle it?" "He doubled down on the rules," Martha said. "He became even more strict about following them, even more careful. And eventually things calmed down. The farm seemed satisfied that he was serious, that he would not waver. It took about 3 months, but things went back to normal. 3 months. I could handle 3 months of heightened activity if I knew there was an end in sight. I went home and prepared myself for what was coming. I reinforced all the locks on the doors. I made sure I had plenty of supplies so I would not need to leave the property. I reviewed the rules over and over, making sure I understood every nuance, every implication. That night the barn was more active than ever. I counted at least a dozen figures moving around the yard. They did not approach the house, but they moved in complex patterns like they were performing some kind of ritual. I watched from my window, careful to stay hidden, and documented everything. The rocking chair on the porch began moving at 11 p.m. and did not stop until 4 a.m. 5 straight hours of constant motion. I sat in the living room listening to the rhythmic creaking, fighting the urge to go out and make it stop. The voices from the woods called my name so many times I lost count. They were louder now, more insistent, and they used more voices. I heard my mother, my father, my grandfather, even Mike. They called and called, but I did not answer. I stayed inside, doors locked, and waited for them to stop. And the scarecrow? Every morning I checked, and every morning it was in a different position. Never as close as it had been that first time, but never in exactly the same spot. It was circling the property, I realized, moving slowly around the perimeter like a guard or a sentinel. 1 week into this heightened activity, something new happened. I was sleeping, or trying to sleep, when I was awakened by a knocking on my bedroom door. Not the front door, not a window, but the door to my bedroom from the inside hallway. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The knock came again, 3 measured taps. "Eric," a voice called from the other side of the door. It was my grandfather's voice, perfect and clear. "Eric, I need to talk to you. Please open the door." Every instinct screamed at me to open it, to see my grandfather one more time. But I knew it was not him. It could not be him. This was another test, another attempt to make me break the rules. "I know you are not real," I said, my voice shaking. "I know the rules. I am not opening the door." The knocking stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, walking away from my door, down the stairs and out of the house. The front door opened and closed, and then everything was quiet again. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat up in bed watching my door, making sure nothing else tried to get in. The next morning I found muddy footprints in the hallway, leading from my bedroom door to the front entrance. They were the size and shape of my grandfather's boots, the ones that still sat by the front door. But the boots themselves were exactly where they had always been, undisturbed. I cleaned up the footprints and added another entry to my journal. I was beginning to understand something important. The farm was not trying to hurt me. It was testing me, yes, but it was also communicating. It was showing me what it could do, demonstrating its power, but always within the bounds of the rules. As long as I did not break them, I would be safe. This realization gave me strength. I stopped being quite so afraid and started being more observant. I watched the patterns more carefully, documented everything with scientific precision. I was determined to understand this place, not just survive it. March turned into April, and slowly, gradually, the activity began to decrease. The figures in the barn appeared less frequently. The rocking chair moved less often. The voices from the woods called my name maybe once a week instead of every night. And the scarecrow settled into one position in the north field and stayed there. By May, things had returned to what I now considered normal. The farm had tested me and I had passed. I had proven that I would follow the rules no matter what, that I was committed to being the caretaker this place needed. Mike called me in early June. "I am getting married," he said, his voice full of excitement, "and I want you to be my best man. Wedding is in August. You will come, right?" "Of course," I said, feeling a rush of affection for my friend. I would not miss it. "Will you be okay leaving the farm for a few days?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. I thought about it. My grandfather had left the farm occasionally, for funerals and important events. The key was preparation and respect. "I will make arrangements," I said. "I will talk to Martha, make sure someone from town checks on the place. And I will follow the rules right up until I leave and immediately when I return. The farm really has become your home, has not it?" Mike said softly. "Yes," I said, and I realized it was true. It has. The wedding was beautiful, held in a small church in Mike's hometown in Ohio. I stood beside him as he married a wonderful woman named Jennifer, and I gave a speech at the reception about friendship and loyalty. For 3 days I was in the normal world, surrounded by normal people dealing with normal things. But I found myself eager to return to the farm. I missed it, missed the strange comfort of knowing exactly what the rules were and how to follow them. The normal world felt chaotic and unpredictable compared to the farm's honest strangeness. When I drove back to Blackwater, it felt like coming home. I pulled up to the farmhouse at around 7 p.m., just as the sun was setting. I made sure not to look toward the north field, toward the scarecrow as I unloaded my bags. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. Martha had checked on the place daily, making sure the doors were locked and nothing seemed amiss. I called her to let her know I was back, and she sounded relieved. That night, I sat on the porch in the warm summer air, and the rocking chair beside me began to move. I smiled at it like an old friend. "I am back," I said softly, "and I am staying." The chair rocked gently, almost approvingly, and I felt that strange sense of peace again. This was where I belonged. This was my purpose. As summer progressed, I realized I needed to start thinking about the future. I was 23 now, but one day I would be old like my grandfather. I needed to make sure that whoever came after me would be prepared, would understand the rules, would respect the land. I started writing my own guide, more detailed than the one my grandfather had left me. I documented not just the rules, but the patterns I had observed, the behaviors of the supernatural elements, the best ways to coexist with the strangeness. I wanted whoever came next to have every advantage, every piece of knowledge I had gained. I also started reaching out to distant family members, trying to find someone who might be interested in eventually taking over the farm. I had cousins I had never met, aunts and uncles scattered across the country. Someone in our bloodline needed to be prepared for this responsibility. One evening in late July, I was sitting on the porch, writing in my journal, when a car pulled up the driveway. A young man got out, maybe 19 or 20, with red hair and a nervous smile. "Are you Eric?" he asked. "Yes," I said, standing up. "Who are you?" "I am James," he said. "Your second cousin, I think?" "Your grandfather was my great-uncle. I heard you inherited this place, and I wanted to see it. My grandmother used to tell me stories about this farm. I invited him in and we talked late into the night." James had grown up hearing whispered stories about the strange farm in Blackwater, about the rules that had to be followed. His grandmother had been my grandfather's sister, and she had lived here as a child before moving away. She told me that if I ever got the chance, I should come see the farm, James said. She said it was important that someone in the family understand, that the knowledge not be lost. But she died last year, and I thought maybe it was too late. It is not too late, I said. Would you like to stay for a few days? I can show you the farm, explain the rules. James's eyes lit up. Really? You would do that? And so I had an apprentice of sorts. I spent the next week teaching James everything I knew. I showed him my grandfather's journals and my own notes. I explained each rule in detail and why it was important. We watched the barn together during the forbidden hours. We sat beside the rocking chair as it moved. We stood at a safe distance from the north field at sunset, feeling the weight of the scarecrow's attention. James was a good student, respectful and careful. He understood the gravity of what he was learning. By the time he left, I felt confident that if something happened to me, if I could not be the caretaker anymore, James would be ready to take my place. I will come back, he promised as he packed his car to leave. Maybe next summer I can stay longer, really learn the land. You are always welcome, I said. This is your family's land too. After James left, I felt a sense of relief. The burden did not rest solely on my shoulders anymore. There was someone else who knew, who understood, who could carry on the tradition if needed. As autumn approached again, marking a full year since I had arrived at the farm, I reflected on how much I had changed. I was not the scared, confused young man who had opened that letter from my grandfather. I had become the caretaker, the keeper of the rules, the guardian of this strange and honest place. I thought about what my grandfather had written, about how the land wanted to be acknowledged and respected. I thought about Jeremiah Cross and whatever bargain he had made here, and I thought about all the generations of my family who had lived here, following the rules, keeping the knowledge alive. One October evening, I sat on the porch as the sun set, and I spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the land itself. I understand now, I said. I understand why my grandfather stayed, why he protected this place. It is not about fear, it is about responsibility. It is about being a witness to something strange and wonderful and terrible, and making sure that knowledge is not lost. I will stay here. I will follow the rules. I will protect this land for as long as I am able. And when I am gone, I will make sure someone else knows, someone else understands. That is my promise to you. The rocking chair beside me began to move, slow and gentle. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, carrying with it that strange, sweet scent I had noticed my first day here. And from somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard my grandfather's voice. Real this time, not a trick or a lure, but a genuine whisper on the wind. Good boy. Tears ran down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of understanding, of acceptance, of finding my place in the world. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since arriving at the farm. I did not set my alarm for 1:45 a.m. I did not need to anymore. I knew the rhythms of this place, knew the rules in my bones. I trusted the farm, and it trusted me. The next morning, I woke with the sunrise and went outside. The scarecrow stood in the north field. The barn was quiet and still, and the rocking chair sat motionless on the porch. Everything was as it should be. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my journal open before me. I had one final entry to make, a conclusion to the record I had been keeping. It has been 1 year since I inherited my grandfather's farm, I wrote. 1 year since I learned about the rules and the strangeness that lives here. I came here afraid and uncertain, not knowing if I would survive, let alone thrive. But I have learned that this land, for all its supernatural qualities, operates on a simple principle: respect. The rules are not arbitrary punishments or random restrictions. They are a language, a way of communicating with something that exists beyond normal understanding. By following them, we show that we acknowledge this place for what it truly is. We show that we can coexist with the unknown without trying to destroy it or exploit it. I am 23 years old, and I have found my life's purpose. I am the caretaker of something strange and sacred. I am the keeper of the rules, and I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I closed the journal and looked out the window at the land that was now truly my home. The farm stretched out before me, beautiful and mysterious in the morning light. Somewhere in the barn, something waited for night to fall. In the north field, the scarecrow stood watch. In the woods, voices slept, waiting for their chance to call my name. And beneath it all, woven into the very soil, was the presence of something ancient and unknowable. Something that my great-great-great-grandfather Jeremiah Cross had awakened or created or bargained with over a century ago. But I was not afraid anymore. I had the rules, and I had understanding, and I had the determination to honor the responsibility that had been passed down through my family. Whatever happened, whatever strange occurrences the future might bring, I would face them with the knowledge that I was doing what needed to be done. The farm was mine, and I was its. We belonged to each other now, bound by rules and respect and the strange honest truth of this place, and that was enough. As I sit here now writing these final words, the sun is setting once again. Soon it will be time to close the curtains facing the north field, to make sure I do not accidentally look directly at the scarecrow. In a few hours I will prepare for the forbidden time between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., staying inside and away from the barn. Tomorrow the rocking chair might move, and I will let it rock until it stops on its own. And perhaps in the days to come I will hear my name called from the woods and I will not answer. These are the rules. This is my life, and I would not have it any other way. The old farm's rules are not a burden to me anymore. They are a gift, a framework for understanding the impossible. They are proof that there are still mysteries in this world, still things that defy explanation. And I am grateful, more grateful than I can express, to be trusted with this knowledge, this responsibility. My name is Eric. I am 23 years old, and I am the caretaker of my grandfather's old farm in Blackwater, Pennsylvania, a place where the rules must be followed, where the strange and supernatural are acknowledged and respected, and where I have finally found where I belong. The farm has taught me that not all strange things are evil, not all rules are restrictions, and not all inheritances are burdens. Sometimes the strangest gift can be the most precious. Sometimes the most binding rules can be the ones that set you free. This is my story. This is my truth. And these are the rules that I will follow for the rest of my days, protecting this land and all its mysteries, ensuring that the knowledge passes to the next generation, and honoring the legacy of all those who came before me. The sun has set. It is time to follow the rules once more, and I do so gladly with understanding and respect, knowing that this is my purpose, my calling, my home. Welcome to the farm. Remember the rules, and never forget that some places in this world are different, are other, are bound by agreements older than memory. This is one of those places, and I am honored to be its keeper.